So Troy, tell us about E3's training strategy and how we're raising up movement leaders all over the world using 5 levels of leadership.
Yeah, Daniel, man, these are exciting days.
Yeah.
As, we're laboring at E3 to see a church accessible to every person and really laboring on the benchmark of 1 million new churches by 2020. Man, that is God-sized vision. That's a vision we're dying for. And just the simplicity of us focusing on praying and making disciples, starting churches, and then now mobilizing missionary teams, short-term and long-term, where, as we saw in the other video, just working to establish some stateside teams, some home teams here in the U.S. that are catalyzing movement. And then from that, mobilizing field teams, long-term teams to the field who are going to go after unreached and unengaged people groups. And, of course, really continue to utilize the short-term trips and the expeditions for training and coaching. And but in order for us to see these God-sized things happen, when we look at the scriptures, when we look at church history, when we look at today, it's really about finding the right people to invest your life into. We would say at least 60 to 90 days a year when you find the right people, and then giving them the tools and the support that they need at the right time to be successful. And the reason we're talking about training today is training, we found, is the means by which we help really find or raise up the right people and equip them with what they need at the right time to be successful, so we can see movements, birthing movements. And so today we're going to talk about, just to kind of inform, our training and how we train and why we train, when and where, and utilizing the 4Fields. There's a tool within 4Fields called the 5 levels of movement leadership that really just helps us illustrate how we train and raise up leaders and identify them. This first, I don't know if you can see the cursor here, but the box.
Yeah.
Okay, the box is at the top. This is cutting edge technology, Daniel, on Zoom here. The L1 is a seed sower, somebody who can confidently sow the gospel seed, share the gospel with others. And L2 would be a church planter, somebody that makes disciples and can gather a group of believers together and begin to help them learn how to become a healthy church. And L3 would be a church plant multiplier. Here we're seeing this church that started begin to release the authority and responsibility, and people begin to make disciples and form churches. And so we see the kingdom multiply, that they're seeing churches ideally multiply to 4th generation and beyond. We see that as a tipping point. And L4 would be a movement trainer, somebody who can go into another context or another place and train to help catalyze a movement there to 4th generation or beyond. And
so at L3, they're working with their own network, and then at L4, they're serving someone else's.
That's right. That's exactly right. And then L5 is an SC, or a strategy coordinator. So they are not only catalyzing movement maybe in one segment or one people group, but they're now going after the gaps in a region or an area of, okay, where are the people who aren't reached, which segments? And so trying to see movements, catalyze movements to reach, to make sure to fill the gaps in so that there's no place left, no one who hasn't heard.
Okay. All right. So, we're all familiar with the 4Fields strategy. How does 5 levels fit with 4Fields?
Okay. Well, we've got our 4Fields diagrams here, but I want to back up real quick, Daniel. I want to point out that everyone is a seed sower. 100% of Christians have been commanded to make disciples. So all of us, whether we're behind a desk supporting people in the field, or we're on the front lines, everyone's called to make disciples. So all of us as believers should be seed sowers. So we train everybody to sow seed, right? But we're noticing that about 10% of seed sowers end up becoming church planners. And about 10% of church planners end up becoming L3 church plant multipliers. And we see the same thing. 10% of L3s become L4s, and about 10% of L4s become L5s. So if you go down at the bottom, I don't know if you can see that, but if you do the math, that means to find one L5 leader, one strategy coordinator, we've got to train 10,000 people. Okay. So this is why last year we aimed at training 100,000 people, and we've seen it play out here, or we saw it play out overseas, but also here in the US and different cities, particularly in Florida. I think we had to train about 10,000 before we found an Augie or a Tom. So that's why it's so important for us to train these things broadly. But then, as we're going to see later, really narrow in on finding those force-soil people, making sure we're giving them 60 to 90 days a year. But I want to just stress too in that we're almost uncomfortable with the term level because everyone is equally valuable in the kingdom, and we actually need all of these roles. And quite honestly, the sweet spot of movement is this L3 role, this church plant multiplier, which in most cases can be volunteer bivocational. But the way it fits in with the 4 fields, if we see the diagram here underneath, looking at, field 1 is entry, field 2 is gospel. There's a number of tools that can be used. We want them to be simple so they can reproduce. We want them to be biblical so God can use them. But we've landed on a few tools that we want to be consistent with, especially as we're starting new works. And it's just really important that the home teams here in the U.S. and the field teams that we're mobilizing over there, man, as much as we can sync up as possible. I know different contexts might tweak some of the gospel tools or even some of the story sets. I'm so thankful for the reality team to help us with that. But these are some of the tools that we've really landed on at E3. So the L1 needs, field 1 and 2. The L2 needs fields 1 through 4, knowing how to add the discipleship and the church piece. And the L3 needs all 5 fields, including leadership. And beyond that, L4 and L5, you're obviously using all 5 fields. But as I mentioned, we've landed on some specific tools that we want to train for each of these levels. Starting with prayer, man, Kay and Jim Johns have developed some amazing prayer resources that we're utilizing. And we see prayer as, man, it's all 5 levels. We need it throughout. It's the fuel. But, as we look at the L1, looking at entry strategy, we're training people in a tool we call the oikos map to really identify the people in their life and generations of people far from God to pray for. Also, the Luke 10 House of Peace search, looking for the person of peace in communities where they don't really know people. The Field 2 tool, as far as gospel, we're using the 15-second testimony and a tool called the 3 circles, and also some story sets depending on the context. I'm really thankful for the orality team there. But those are our tools we're using for L1. Then for L2, for the church planner, we add the 3/3 pattern of discipleship. For short-term discipleship of new believers, we're using the commands of Christ. And for long-term, continuing with the 3/3, using the book of Mark. We're using the hermeneutic, the sword method, asking some specific questions to interact with the text together. And then for our field 4, our church health, we're using the Acts 2 church circle. And then we move on into the L3. Honestly, this is the biggest jump, Daniel, because we go from, you see that green dotted line, we go from addition to multiplication. And we're really seeing vision increase and humility increase as people are having to give the kingdom away. And so we have some leadership development tools. We use the 4 fields. We train in model, assist, watch, and leave. We're training people in a tool called the Iron on Iron, which is a small group problem-solving coaching tool that we use together to really diagnose health, specifically using gen mapping, where we're using the church circle to track generations of disciples and generations of churches to really track health, and that becomes useful to the field worker. It's a tracking tool that's actually helpful for them. It's not just getting information. Right. But that Iron on Iron with gen mapping is really important. And then also just teaching people how, using some simple tools, how to dig into the Gospels and Acts to learn the process, and into the epistles for how to help these churches continue to become healthy, and these disciples continue to become healthy. So these are some of the tools that we've landed on. And as far as how we would, some terminology, we packet the L1 tool. It's called the 411, answering those 4 questions in 1 hour on 1 piece of paper. And that transitions into the L2 packet, which is the commands of Christ. which again uses the 3/3 format with the Acts 2 church circle. Once we get into the L3, we don't have a specific packet. I guess the 4Fields manual is helpful because it's got a lot of those tools in there. But this is really just where we jump into coaching and mentoring. And if you look at this red time here, it's just showing how much time do we invest. So it's not as much with L1, L2. We can train broadly and see the training reproduce. But once we see these fourth soil, a Mark IV reference, these fourth soil people that really bear a lot of fruit, we need to start investing not just information, but our lives into these people, walking with them and making sure we give them what we need. And we would say a minimum of 60 to 90 days a year, we need to start investing in those folks. So that's where the coaching and mentoring really comes in there, Daniel, on into, level 4. And then once the level 5 leadership, they're running, we're just trying to keep up and learn from them at that point.
Awesome. Well, I know that, we've got a lot of folks who are doing short-term trips overseas, and we've got teams of Americans, for example, that we're taking to a country, and we've got our national partners. How do those, two groups of folks fit on this framework of the 5 levels?
Well, I mean, obviously here in the U.S., man, we want to train broadly so we can see leaders emerge. This is a mission field. But then as we're going in and training in other cities and more of a non-residential model, or as we're going overseas, our goal, just like Paul, he went in and, we want to find the local. We believe that the plan is for the locals to take local ownership of the core missionary task. And so I think as much as possible, handing over when we're working cross-culturally, identifying those local leaders, that they become the L5s, they become the L4s that really drive the strategy and will multiply themselves into other countries and other contexts.
Well, we all have to operate within time and space. So what are some ways that we can roll out the training that fits with the rhythm of what we're doing, either residentially in our local area or in like the non-residential model where we're overseas?
Yeah, good. Well, looking down here at the bottom, we've got some training rollouts that we've found to be effective. The residential, we're really trying to, where we live, we're there long term, trying to learn to go at the pace of the bivocational, the volunteer. 98% of leadership in a movement needs to be volunteer, bivocational.
You need people that are working a job on the one hand, but also owning their missionary role.
That's right. That's right. And so we found a good rhythm to start with is to ask them for 4 to 6 hours a week, ask them to commit to a 3/3 where they can learn the 411, they can learn the commands, they can get long-term discipleship, they can form a church if they want to, but also as a team to go out in the harvest together, engaging lost people. And then if they've got additional time, having them begin to train other people. So that 4 to 6 hour weekly rhythm. This also allows them, a lot of times the Bivo people, they have a hard time going to some of the event trainings. And so, we had a team down here that was the case, and we started just meeting weekly, added that third gathering for 2 hours a week and began using the 3/3. We began to introduce a lot of these Field 5 tools, L3 tools.
Yeah, I know our team here in Atlanta, Troy, I mean, we're almost all bivocational, myself included, and we've just not had time to do these long extended training events. Mm-hmm. So what is the weekly commitment from an hourly perspective that you're normally asking from a bivocational person?
Well, it's once they get to the L3 level, we're really asking for 6 hours, 3 hours of, or 2 hours of 3/3, 2 hours of harvest, and then 2 hours of weekly coaching. We call it Timothy training in some cases, but it's where we're really bringing out the Field 5 tools and going, using the 4Fields to discover the Gospels and Acts together and get into the epistles. And we do a quarterly iron and iron in that time, updating their gen map. And so, we found that with a weekly rhythm, we can do that. The event trainings are helpful when they can get to them, but it is possible to do it with just week to week. Then when we're talking about the non-residential, and that is where we're either training to go into another city. I think we're by God's grace, we saw 31 teams established in 31 cities last year. And we're not living there. or for folks who are leading expeditions or going overseas, leading trips and trying to catalyze movements in different parts of the world. There's a way to roll this training out using, event trainings. And so for the L1, L2, we're calling that the 3-touch training. And the whole purpose of the 3-touch training is to form a team and of these pioneering types. And, in an urban setting, we're in all of them, we're following the model, assist, watch. We're following MAWL. So we're modeling a training, we're assisting the second one, and we're watching the third. In an urban setting, we're doing it's spreading it out for 6 to 9 months with a weekly rollout of 401 and the commands in between. In a rural setting, like I know Augie down in Peru, they did 3 touches in 3 days, and I know you have done over in Asia.
We did 3 touches in 4 months in Asia.
Yeah. Okay, but I know some folks have done it in 6 to 10 days if they need a translator. And especially in a rural setting. But the 3-touch training, it gives 3 touches of the 401 and the commands and going out in the harvest, and really helps them establish that weekly rhythm of a team. At the end of it, boom, you've got a team. You've got catalytic people. You've typically are beginning to see who the general, who the leader is. And then when we move into the L3, 2 to 3 months later after the 3-touch training, we're going back and doing a 4Fields intensive training. And that's really, it's about 4 days long, and it's where we're really introducing biblical principles. We learned the practicals, and now we're giving best principles here, including the leadership development tools, and really digging it out of the scriptures. And we want our people to become biblicists, not just pragmatists. And they leave that training with a 3-year plan. And it is possible to just step into that without having gone through the 3-touch. I wouldn't say it's ideal, but man, we had the Vais from Haiti with some Haitians come to a training, and they went back and over the last 20 months, they saw God multiply 24,000 baptisms, new disciples, and 3,200 new churches, including 11th generation streams. So we're not going to say, hey, don't just come to a 4Fields intensive, where I think they're drinking from the fire hose, but it serves as an entry point for people that have had no exposure before. Right. But then, they leave with a 3-year plan, and I'd say 2 to 3 months later, we'd like to gather them together for a 2 to 3 day retreat type mid-level training. And that's really for the folks that are doing it. It doesn't serve people who haven't started doing it yet, because it's a problem solving. You're learning from the harvest. You're learning from what's happening in that network. And, particularly using the iron and the gen mapping. But after those trainings, you really identify not only the team, but who the generals are. And you can identify who are the people you really want to spend your 60 to 90 days coaching and mentoring towards that long-term health.
So Troy, one thing I've heard about for the residential model that's really helpful is something called a residency. Mm-hmm. What are those, and how do they fit into our home team and field team model?
Yeah, man, it's something that we've been learning from others. We get to the end of the 3-touch training and a 4Fields intensive, and a local church or a local team says, you know what, we really want to commit to mobilizing church planners or mobilizing missionaries. And we thought, well, man, you guys can do this. So it's just taking that bivocational rhythm, the 6 hours a week, adding an hour of intense accountability for personal holiness. And these churches or teams are over a 1 to 2 year period are training up their own teams of church planners and missionaries that we're then mobilizing to those field teams overseas and going after the gaps. And so, we have the ability to not only identify the calling in folks and the character, but now we can see them develop the competency, the skills of making disciples and starting churches and coaching and mentoring leaders as we send them out. So they're having to learn language and culture when they go long term, but man, for them to already have the skills to see multiplication, I mean, we've not seen anything like this before. And wow. So the residency is a key component of this Great Commission pipeline. as we're mobilizing church planting and missionary teams out of movements to the gaps in the U.S. and overseas.
It really is unique. I mean, I don't know of any missions organization that are sending missionaries who've gotten to learn those competencies at home. Mm. And when you cast this vision with a pastor, he lights up because he's like, wait, you want to help me form a team of disciple makers, church planners, and missionaries here locally?
That's right.
And then we've got field teams that we can help mobilize them to. Mm. It really is a unique thing that God's doing here.
Well, the other great thing of that too is we require them to participate in an expedition. We require that they go over into the heart of a movement, mostly in South Asia. So like, for example, the church in Tulsa, they're mobilizing 50 units overseas in the next 10 years. And so part of their training is they're taking expeditions over into to work with the field teams. And Mike Jorgensen led an expedition with them. So we're seeing the expeditions play a key role in the residencies and seeing those different gears working together we've talked about.
Yeah. Cool. So where does the orality fit? I know we talked about the L4 role and the coaching and diagnosing, but I think we've got a great team there, and you've mentioned them.
Oh yeah, they're amazing. Yeah, Steve and the orality team, man, they're super helpful. I know they're looking at the training and really helping us refine and sharpen and come up with some orality friendly. I don't know if that's the proper terminology, but to really helping us think through how to do this in oral contexts. And we also have to consider we're going to have Muslim context, Hindu context, Buddhist. So there's going to be different story sets that work and tools that work for different contexts. They're really crucial, especially in the L4s. We're going in and training others. And I'll tell you another really great resource we have at E3 is Dwayne Falk. And, we're talking about raising up SC strategy coordinators and just them learning where the gaps are and where are the unreached, where are the unengaged people groups, those red dots that are remaining that we're laboring towards,
right? And
being able to learn from them, where those folks are. So, Daniel, as we're looking at all this, it might be overwhelming for folks. I know there's a lot of for some new terminology, and we're excited. This isn't the only process and tools, but we are confident that this is biblical, and we've seen this work in multiple contexts. And some folks just might feel a little overwhelmed. We want you to know that our goal is we're laboring towards this vision. We value everyone, and we believe God's called you here for a purpose. And we as the training team, we really want to serve each region and country strategy by making sure that you have the trainers and the coaches that you need to be successful. Now, many of you have trainers and coaches already. And man, we love to network with and celebrate together as a learning community of trainers and coaches. But we also want to help provide for those who are like, man, I don't have enough trainers or coaches for my country strategy. We really want to help you. That's our goal. And for this great commission pipeline of disciple making, church planning, missionary mobilization, with home teams mobilizing to the field teams, we need the home and the field team, the common language, common tools, common strategy to sync up as much as possible. So for some folks,
like Tom Hall, he's working on a list right now of like coaches that are available, trainers that are available within our organization.
Oh, that's great.
And they're just eager to help. So,
well, I know we got some rock star trainers and people that have been able to catalyze movements and maybe have used something other than 4Fields. I know, especially where we're pioneering a new work, if we can just begin to learn to do this together as much sync as possible, I think we're really going to be able to move forward and see the task finished.
Yeah.
But, well, Daniel, I want to honor people's time, but would love for you just to briefly speak into, I know you've had a chance to see this play out overseas with the Indochina team. Could you just tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're running this play here locally in Atlanta. I run a small business, and we've been kind of functioning L1, 2, and 3 here in Atlanta, seeing God do some amazing things in terms of new churches and disciples and baptisms. And then I had a foot in Laos just doing some short-term Bible smuggling trips over there. And so Mike Jorgensen heard about that and connected me with Gloria Stewart, who heads up our Indochina team at E3. And then kind of we were talking about where the countries were at in Laos and Vietnam and Cambodia. And we put a vision cast on the calendar with Kumar, who's one of our trainers in Asia. And so he and I went 2 by 2 which is a pattern, Troy, by the way. I don't know if most people know this, but about of the 500 movements we've seen globally, most of them are catalyzed by an outsider and then going with an insider, like a Kumar, who can really help us walk through, the subtle cultural differences with how we're running the same play in our context versus another one. And so we cast vision, and there were some leaders in Cambodia who really grabbed hold that Gloria's team had already been working with. And the Egans who head up Cambodia had a prayer strategy running the entire time while we were in country, and just really saw God open some cool doors. We came back 6 months later and did our first L1-2 training in the capital of Cambodia, and really watched these leaders light up as they received a vision to go and train their own people in this. And I got to come back a couple months later, and there was one guy named Peter who really caught it, and I got to do a second and a third touch with him. So by the third touch, Troy, he's leading the entire thing, and he's using his own language, and he's even tweaking the symbols a little bit to really fit his culture. And I'm at this point learning from him how to train people in Cambodia. And so we set some goals, and I came back about 3 months later, and we did a mini 4Fields intensive at his house, and just really rolled out some of these tools. We talked about MAL a lot. We practiced it. We talked about iron on iron and gen mapping, and got into the Word a good bit. And these folks set a goal to plant 55 churches by February of next year, and had already seen around 30 new churches started. Some of them are the third generation since January. And so they now have a vision and a strategy to really engage some of the unreached areas in Cambodia. And they're doing it. They're sending me texts and photos all the time of seeing people come to Christ, get baptized, and new churches started as they embrace their role as priests of God. And really we're seeing several emerging L3, L4 leaders in Cambodia through this strategy. So
that's phenomenal. Man, that's exciting, Daniel. Well, these are exciting times, and I hope that this was helpful for folks. I know as we are trying to roll out our strategies and trainings in different places, I know one of the things that we found helpful is to really narrow in on what's the big vision and what's the clear path and what are the simple steps that we want to take. And it's exciting to be part of a vision that's worth dying for, to see a church accessible to every person with the benchmark of 1 million churches by 2020. I think our path is clear, in that we're using the 4Fields, and hopefully it's been helpful to map out kind of how we're training and why we're training and what that looks like. And we'd love for many of you to come and swarm. There's an abundance of training opportunities. We'd love you to join.
We're going to put those on the site, right? Make a list of especially these 4-day intensives.
Yep. But the clear path of 4Fields and how to roll this out. And the next would be just simple steps, knowing where you're at and what you need to do next, and how to invite other people into taking those first steps of plugging in. And we hope that this is helpful to clarifying what the big vision is and the clear path and the simple steps we want to take. We need everyone to go after this task together. And so let's love each other. Let's be praying for each other. And let's go after it till there's no place left. We want to see Jesus come back. So Daniel, thanks for your time, and really appreciate you and appreciate everyone at E3. These just excited to do this together, man.
Appreciate you. Thanks for communicating all this, and look forward to seeing what God uses.
Come train with us. Come train with us, everybody. And if you got questions, let us know. You can get a hold of me, troy.cooper@e3partners.org.
Yep, daniel.sol@e3partners.org. So, all right.